What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We're doing something we haven't really done before, which is a tier list. We haven't really done any tier lists here on the channel before. The most recent episode of Upkeep is Voltron week, and the episode of End Step where we talk about the game and the decks, that's also out. Go check that game out and the discussion about it if you haven't checked those out yet. But I thought it'd be fun to do a tier list. So this is the top 20 Voltron commanders, more or less. This is according to EDH Rec. So I looked at their list, and I think they had like 24 to choose from. And then I also threw in a couple of my personal favorite Voltron commanders in there as well. And just narrowed it down to 20, a nice clean number. And we're just going to go ahead and go through them and do a tier list of them. If there's another topic for a commander tier list that you would like me to cover, let me know in the comments down below. Let's go ahead and start with Alayla, Artful Provocateur. So this is the deck that Paige played on that said episode of Upkeep. And granted, hers was more of a fairy tribal deck than it was a Voltron deck, but let's go ahead and read her real quick. For 1 in Esper, she's a 2/3 with flying, death touch, lifelink, fairy warlock. Other creatures you control get flying and get +1/+0. And whenever you cast an artifact or enchantment spell, create a 1/1 blue fairy token with flying. So this actually got me thinking that I'm actually starting to build my own Alayla deck. I will do a deck tech for it here on the channel when I finish it. But the way that I am building it, and I think this is the correct way to play it if you are going to do a Voltron build around Alayla, is you're just going to play a bunch of equipments. So you build up all of your equipments, and every time you cast an equipment, they're all artifacts. So you are also creating fairies. So what you would do is you'd build up Alayla, get in with Alayla, but then you still have blockers back thanks to all of these other fairies. And if you end up with enough of them, you might be able to just help finish off another player that you haven't been able to get in enough commander damage on. So overall, I think it's a pretty strong, pretty unique. I don't think that you necessarily have to play it Voltron, which is also cool. The fact that there's multiple ways to build it, not just in Voltron, but if you're going to do Fairy Tribal or even Flying Tribal, you're doing artifacts or enchantments matter. There's a lot of ways to build this. I like that flexibility, but it's also just pretty strong. And if you are specifically doing it as a Voltron commander, and you'll see this a little bit others with some of these other options down here, but the option to also then make other creatures that you can then protect yourself with, because that's a weakness in Voltron, is that you're swinging in with your one main creature, and then you probably don't have a lot of ways to protect yourself. You don't have a lot of blockers or whatever. So the fact that she gives you those blockers, and then you can probably go wide with them enough that you might be able to help finish off another player, is pretty cool. For now, let's put Alayla at the top of A. The way I'm going to measure this is ultimately my own opinion, but I'm going to use a little bit of I think it's cool with, is it good as a Voltron commander, with, is it actually fun? So there's a couple different factors in play here, but ultimately it's my own opinion. All right, next up we have Chishiro the Shattered Blade. This is one of the commander precons from Kamigawa. So legendary Snake Samurai 4/4 for 2 and a red and a green. Whenever an aura or an equipment enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 red spirit creature token with menace. At the beginning of your end step, put a 1/1 counter on each modified creature you control. This kind of has the same thing with Alayla as far as it's giving you other creatures, and I would actually argue that the spirit tokens that Chishiro is giving you are probably better than the 1/1s that Alayla is giving you. Maybe not. I think it depends on the board state. Chishiro also has a little bit of, there's multiple ways you could go about building it, but I think Voltron is probably the correct way to go about it. Also, I think the buff that Chishiro gives is better than the buff that Alayla gives. With that said, Alayla came first. Chishiro kind of feels similar. I don't think it's as creative of a design, even if it's like debatably just as strong. We're going to put it top of B. I think it's cool, but it's not as cool. And also, I also just don't like the color combination as well. Personal preference, but that, you know what? It's my channel. It's my list. We'll go with that for now. And if I want to change it later, I can. I also want to apologize for my voice. I am very sick right now, and you know what? I'm not having a good time, but I'm going to make this video anyway so that hopefully other people can have a good time. All right, next up we have Galia, Kindler of Hope. This is the deck that Tommy played on that episode of Upkeep. For 1, a green, a white, and a blue, it's a 4/4 Elf Knight with Vigilance. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast aura and equipment spells from the top of your library. When you cast an equipment spell this way, it gains when this equipment enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. That is honestly one of the strongest effects that you can get in a Voltron build. So the problem with aura enchantments is that they are prone to blowout. You know, you remove the creature, you probably also lost the enchantment, and that's a real big feel bad. But with equipments, yes, you get to keep them around, but the equip cost is honestly really high at the time. So the fact that Galea kind of gets around that is pretty bonkers, and it's pretty strong, and it's in good colors for doing such a thing. You're going to have a lot of good auras in these colors. You're also going to have blue, which is giving you top deck manipulation to maybe try to put the right cards on top of your deck that you want. Green, I think, is underrated in Voltron, getting a ramp and getting to chain your spells together early because, you know, God forbid something happens and you have to actually pay for your costs. I think that's important. So we're going to go ahead and put Galea in the A category as well. I think as far as power, it's probably better than Alayla, so I'm trying to decide. We'll put it below Alayla. I don't think it's as cool, but I think as far as power and just being a good idea for a Voltron commander, I think it's actually one of the better designs. So let's go ahead and go to the next one. This is Grun the Lonely King. So for 4 green, it's an Ape Warrior 5/5 with kicker 3, and if it was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 5 1/1 counters. And whenever it attacks alone, double its power and toughness until end of turn. This is great because green has some interesting options. I think Rancor is probably the best option. You're going to immediately give it trample. I think that's the main thing you're going to want. You give this thing trample, it's going to be a hefty beater, and you're in the ultimate ramp color, so being able to pay that kicker cost, probably not going to be that hard. I think of the uncommon commanders in Dominaria, I think that this is one of the more interesting options. So we will, but let's be objective here. It's probably not actually that strong. If you wanted to build a mono green Voltron commander, I think it's a decent option. But the power is pretty low. Personally, it doesn't interest me that much. I'm going to put it in, somewhere in the bottom of B, top of C, somewhere in there. We'll put it there to be generous for now. Subject to change later. So next up we have, this is a pretty new card. This is Karn the Betrayer. So for 3 and a red, this is a 5/1 Astartes Berserker. Attacks or blocks each combat if able. When you lose control of it, draw 2 cards. If damage would be dealt to Karn the Betrayer, prevent that damage and an opponent of your choice gains control of it. So this is an interesting design because it's going to be moving around the table a lot, which is not something that's new to Red. We have that in like Humble Defector and stuff like that. But here's the thing. Karn, despite being a very new card, this came out in the Warhammer precons, specifically the Grixis one, the Chaos one. This actually reminds me of another card that is on the list. We're going to go ahead and, I was going to do these just in alphabetical order, but we're going to go ahead and jump over to this one right now because I think it's relevant. This is Slicer Hired Muscle. This is an even newer card. This is from the set boosters in the Brothers War. So it's one of the Transformer ones. So for 5 and a red, it's a legendary artifact creature robot, 3/4, double strike and haste. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you may have that player gain control of Slicer until end of turn. If you do, untap it, goad it. It can't be sacrificed this turn if you don't convert it. And you can cast it converted, meaning casting it on its backside. Also, with the More Than Meets the Eye ability, which is for 2 and a red, and you can cast it for this cost. In that case, it is a 3/2 vehicle with living metal, so as long as it's your turn, it's a creature. First strike, haste, and then whenever it deals combat damage to a player, convert it at the end of combat. This card is kind of trying to do the same thing that Karn is trying to do, but better. And also, let's be honest, we know that there's another Karn in Magic the Gathering, and I know they spelled it different, and maybe you don't say it as actual Karn with, you know, whatever the accent mark of whatever kind that is over the A. I don't know. I'm not a language guy by any means, but I just think that these decks are kind of trying to do the same thing. You're trying to move the card around the table, buff it up. You're going to get buffs off of whatever cards you are equipping to it. Let's see, what are the top equipments? Yeah, you're trying to kind of do the same thing, except that Slicer just does it better. And Slicer is also just really, really strong. So Karn, I actually don't think is all that cool. We're actually going to put Karn in like D tier because I don't actually think it's that cool. And then Slicer is not only cool and weird, but it's also just strictly better. We're actually going to put it in like... we'll put it in top of A. It's also just really strong. Like if you're going to build mono red Voltron, I don't know why you would build something other than Slicer. All right, the next card on our list is Kosi, Penitent Warlord, also from Neon Dynasty. This is for 1 green. It's a 0/5 Ogre Samurai. As long as it is enchanted, equipped, and has counters on it, it has whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, you draw that many cards, and it deals that much damage to each other opponent. So the idea here is that if you meet these requirements, that's another weakness in Voltron, is that you have to kind of focus on one player at a time, and this kind of gets around that. You're still like, I don't think that technically counts as commander damage, right? But you're still going to chip away at each opponent a little bit at a time, and I think it is from the Chishiro deck, so I think actually meeting that requirement is probably not actually all that hard. But let's be real, Voltron commanders, they build up fast, and you know commander damage is coming. You want to answer them right away. I think this is probably too much setup in order for it to be realistic. I think it's a strong effect, but I think it takes too much setup. We're going to go ahead and put him in the C tier. All right, next up we have Kozilek the Great Distortion. This is the deck that I played on that episode of Upkeep. So for 8 colorless, it's a 12/12 Eldrazi. Whenever you cast it, if you have fewer than 7 cards in your hand, draw cards equal to the difference. It has Menace, and you can discard a card with converted mana cost X to counter the spell with converted mana cost X. So that gives you a little bit of control, but really it already has built-in evasion with Menace. And I think the downside, and I think this is evident in the deck that I played in that game, but colorless decks, they have decent ramp. Their card draw is not very good. Your removal's good, which is important. You need removal in a deck in order to make sure you're buying yourself enough time to get your game plan online, which is also problematic when Kozilek is 10 mana. Well, okay, so subjectively speaking, I love Kozilek, the Great Distortion. It's one of the first commander decks I ever built. It's the first Voltron deck I ever built, and I still pull it out every now and then, and it's a lot of fun. But let's be real, it's really not that good. So for cool points, I'd say it's a 10. For power level, it's really not there. But I mean, you give this thing double strike or something, and it's a one-hit KO, assuming you can make contact with the player due to commander damage. So we're gonna put Kaz in the bottom of B. Not the most consistent, but it is really stinking cool. All right, so next up we have Krenko, Tin Street Kingpin. And Krenko, you usually think about Krenko as the Goblin commander, but this specific Krenko, I think, according to EDH Rec at least, a lot of people are doing this as a Voltron deck. So this is for 2 and a red, Goblin, 1/2. Whenever it attacks, put a 1/1 counter on it, then create a number of 1/1 Goblin creature tokens equal to Krenko's power. So to give Krenko where credit is due, it is doing the same thing that that Chishiro and Alayla are doing, which is when you cast your spells or whatever, when you're doing the thing that you want your deck to be doing, you're also pumping out all of these other creatures, which is going to be good in the long term for being able to protect yourself. However, and also being 3 mana is pretty cool because you can get it down relatively quick, and you're in red, so you have haste enablers. You can probably get in on turn 2 or 3 fairly consistently. The thing is, though, Krenko's building himself up really, really slowly. He only starts off as a 1/2. You would have to be building... I don't know. I just feel like, realistically, he's never actually hitting for that much damage, and unless you're getting extra combat steps in, I think it's going to be really hard to do the job. I think Krenko is actually pretty good in the 99 of a Goblin deck, but I think as a Voltron commander himself, I don't actually think he's that interesting, and I don't think he's actually that good. We're going to go ahead and put him in the D tier as well, and I actually think he's less interesting than Karn. I don't think actually anything's going to end up in the F tier, but we'll see. Next up, we have Light Paws, the Emperor's Voice. This is the deck that Preston played on said episode of Upkeep. And again, if you haven't checked out that game, go check it out. It was a really short game. You actually could watch it in less time than it's going to take me to make this video. But for 1 and a white, it's a Fox Advisor 2/2. Whenever an aura enters the battlefield under your control, if you cast it, you may search your library for an aura card with mana value less than or equal to the aura and with a different name then each aura you control, put that card onto the battlefield attached to Lightpaw's Emperor Voice, then shuffle. That is worded in a way to keep it tame in Constructed, because there are decks that care about that kind of stuff in Constructed. People did try to break it in Standard. I didn't really ever see it happen, but in Commander, that's not even a downside because it's a singleton format. Here's the thing with Lightpaws is it's incredibly strong. If you're playing it as optimally as possible, it's actually like there is like a set way of like, I grab this enchantment first, and then I grab this enchantment, and then I grab this enchantment, to the point where no one can stop you, you know, or it's at least very hard to stop you. So I think as far as power, I think it's probably one of, if not the strongest card we're going to talk about today. However, it's really uninteresting to play against because you know that you have to team up on the Lightpaws player, and even if you do that, you're still probably going to lose. So I actually kind of hate Lightpaws. So I'm not going to put it down here in the D tier because I think D tier is like, it's uninteresting and it's weak. I do think Lightpaws is incredibly strong, but it is also really unfun. So we're going to put it, I guess, top of C. So next one is Narset, Enlightened Master. This was an interesting one to see on the Voltron list on EDH Rec, because I always kind of saw Narset as like this Spellslinger kind of commander. So I think it's interesting. I should spend more time actually looking at like the specific way that they are doing it. But for 3 in Jeskai, it's a 3/2 human monk with first strike and hexproof. Whenever it attacks, exile the top 4 cards of your library. Until end of turn, you may cast non-creature spells exiled this way without paying their mana cost. Okay, now I get it. Because here's what you do. You grab these auras, right? You get Eldrazi Conscription and stuff like that. So you just have to give it some kind of evasion, right? So either give it trample, give it flying, something like that, and then you drop something like Eldrazi Conscription, and your game. So I guess that's the way that you do it. So I think Narset is a lot more interesting as a Spellslinger commander, but I see how it's really, really strong in Voltron. I haven't actually ever played against a Narset deck except for once, and it was relatively tame. I know people like to complain about Narset being like brutally strong. That hasn't been my personal experience, but I know that has to be frustrating for the Narset player, that they probably get teamed up on a lot. I haven't had that experience though. So I'm going to give Narset a little bit of slack. I think it's very strong, and I think it's pretty cool. So we're actually going to go ahead and put Narset here in A. Okay, so at the rate I'm going, I don't know if anything's going to end up in S. So here's what we're going to do. If I get to the end of this list and nothing is in S tier, we are going to elect something to S. We're just going to pick my overall favorite. We're going to bump it up there. And same with F. If nothing is an F before the end of this video, we will put something there anyways. All right, next up, we have Rafiq of the Many. This is one of the classic Voltron commanders. This is for 1 in Bant. It's a 3/3 human knight with Exalted. So whenever a creature you control attacks alone, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. In a Voltron theme, that probably just means itself. And whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gains double strike until end of turn. So without any modifications, without any help at all, Rafiq attacking by himself is going to be a 4/4 with double strike. That is 8 commander damage. That's pretty impressive for a 4-mana creature. I think for its time, it was probably the best Voltron deck. I don't know if it really lives up to the hype nowadays. I mean, it just kind of plays a lot of the same kind of stuff. And you know, it has a lot of the nice things I was saying about it when it came to Galea, as far as like its colors. You know, the colors it gives you a lot of opportunities to really make the best of the situation that you are in. However, I just don't think it holds up anymore. So good, not great, cool, but nothing unique. I'm going to put it in probably the middle of C. So below Lightpaws, but above Kosei. So next up, we have Ramses Assassin Lord. This is also a relatively new card. This is for 2 blue, black, 4/4, human assassin with death touch. Other assassins you control get +1/+1. Whenever a player loses the game, if they were attacked this turn by an assassin you control, you win the game. So this is kind of like what I was saying with Alayla is the main example that I gave here, which is that there's multiple ways to take the deck. And I think from the perspective of we want Commander to be healthy and diverse, that's good. I like that there's multiple ways to take it. So Ramses obviously isn't as diverse as Alayla, but you could just run it as an assassin commander. But if you are doing the Voltron theme, you kill one player, you kill them all. And that gets around the main issue that there is with Voltron decks. So that is pretty dang strong. I think the problem here is like, it's so obvious. It's so obvious what's going to happen here, because Ramses is going to come down. You're going to start teaming up on like one player, because if you get that one player out, you automatically knock the other two out. I think people are going to see that happening, and they're either going to continually remove Ramses before you're able to do much with him, or you're just going to get teamed up on. And so I think that makes it more fair because it's so telegraphed what it is you're trying to do. But I think if you were playing it more fairly as an assassin commander, or if it's just in the 99 of an assassin deck, maybe it's like your secret commander in a deck like that, I think that could be pretty dang cool. But we're specifically talking about Voltron today. So Voltron, pretty neat. Pretty strong, but it's so telegraphed that it's strong that I don't actually think it's probably really all that good. So we're gonna put it, I don't know, what do you guys think? Maybe bottom of B. It's good, but like, it's so obvious what you're trying to do. All right, so next we have Shadrix Silverquill. So my brother Steven, who's in several of our videos, he has a Shadrix Silverquill deck, but he does not have it as a Voltron deck. But in the comments of that episode of Upkeep that we did, someone in the comments mentioned that they had a Shadrix Silverquill Voltron deck, and I would love to see that deck list. So if you're watching this video, maybe drop your deck list in the description. I'd love to see it. But for 3 white, black, 2/5 Elder Dragon with flying and double strike. Double strike is pretty nice to have when you are playing Voltron, and at the beginning of combat of your turn, you may choose 2. Each mode must target a different player. Target player creates a 2/1 white and black Inkling token with flying. Target player draws a card and loses a life. Target player puts a 1/1 counter on each creature they control. So I think specifically, if you're doing this as a Voltron deck, you are probably going to want to always put the counters on Shadrix. So Shadrix not only has double strike, but it's making itself bigger just by going to combat without having to put auras or equipments on it. That's pretty strong. I mean, yes, you're having to give some other slight benefit to your opponent, but with Commander being a multiplayer format, I think you're always going to be able to choose a player and choose the mode that's most optimally going to give you the upper hand. So again, I haven't seen Shadrix Silverquill as a Voltron commander, but I could actually see it being pretty dang cool. Don't know about strong though, so we're going to put it in top of B. Really cool, not necessarily all that strong, but I would be interested to see it, and maybe worth playing someday. Next up, we have Shu Young the Silent Tempest. This is a 3/2 for 2 and a blue human monk prowess. So whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may play Boros. If you do, target creature gains double strike until end of turn. Here's what you do. You're playing auras or you're playing equipments. Those are non-creature spells. So that's triggering prowess. And then it's going to be pretty easy to then pay only 2 mana to give Shu Young double strike until end of turn. That seems pretty dang strong to me. And also, it's in an interesting color combination. So this does fall in the Jeskai color combination, so blue, red, white. It looks like it, just based on color identity rules in Commander, that's how that works. So that's an interesting color combination for Voltron, and it seems really freaking strong. We're going to go ahead and put Shu Young in the A tier. I don't know where in the A tier. It's definitely cooler than Narset. So let's put it like here, because I think it's really cool and actually really, really strong. Next up, we have Skithiryx the Blight Dragon. It's a 4/4 for 3 black dragon skeleton with flying and infect, and then you can pay a black to give it haste until end of turn, and you can pay double black to regenerate it. Mono black Voltron seems pretty interesting, and the fact that it has infect means you really only have to get in for 10 damage to kill a player, which normally in Voltron, you're trying to get in with commander damage, which is 21 damage, so which is already half that of the starting life total in Commander, and now you're halving that number by going in with Infect. I think that's probably really unfun to play against. However, Mono Black Voltron also just seems really cool. And keep in mind that black is a good ritual color, so you could also just bump up and have extra mana that your opponents weren't expecting to have. So not only are you going to be able to maybe cast Skithiryx a little bit early, but you're almost always going to be able to have that mana to give it haste until end of turn and or regenerate it if someone tries to remove it. But again, I think it's probably pretty unfun to play. So I'm actually going to go ahead and put it right below Kozilek here in the B tier, as in it's like really interesting. And as much as I would probably like to try playing it, I would believe that a lot of other people probably don't want to play against it. So next up we have Tahngarth First Mate. So for 2 red-green, it's a 5/5 Minotaur warrior that can't be blocked by more than one creature. Whenever an opponent attacks with 1 or more creatures, if it is tapped, you may have that opponent gain control of Tahngarth until end of turn. If you do, choose a player or planeswalker that opponent is attacking. It attacks that player or planeswalker. So I think this falls in the category of cards like what we were talking about earlier with Karn and Slicer, as in it's like moving around the table, attacking your other opponents. So and I think this is like the first iteration of that, at least in the cards that we're looking at today. And adding green is a benefit. You know, having more colors in Commander on average means that maybe less consistent mana-wise, the top of your power level is higher. But honestly, I'm not amused by this theme. And so with that said, we're going to go ahead and put Tahngarth in bottom of C. I would rather play it than Karn, but it's really not interesting. But I could see the power being there. It's probably not like crazy strong, and it's not interesting to me. But if I'm overlooking something, let me know. Next up on our list, we have Thraxamundar. This is one of the classic commanders, and I have a Thraxamundar deck. It's not a Voltron build, but it would be pretty easy to make this a Voltron build. So this is for 4, and Grixis is 6/6 zombie assassin with haste. Whenever it attacks, defending player sacrifices a creature, and whenever a player sacrifices a creature, you may put a 1/1 counter on him. So the Thraxamundar deck I have is actually just a sacrifice deck, but I mean, that just makes Thraxamundar get so huge. So here's the problem with Thraxamundar, though, is that he is specifically 7 mana. That is a ton of mana, and in 3 colors that really their only access, well, okay, so black and red, yes, are ritual colors, and then what do you have other than that? You have artifacts for ramp, you don't have land ramp, so it's less permanent. So if someone removes Thraxamundar, which is pretty easy to do, he doesn't protect himself in any way. He is huge, but, you know, throw a couple chump blockers in front of him and he's good. The best card in this deck is here, Rooftop Storm. So for 5 and a blue is an enchantment that says you may pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for zombie creature spells you cast. He is a zombie, so you get that enchantment in play, and I think you still have to pay commander tax if that happens. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure. And if that's the case, if you go to recast Thraxamundar and he's 2 mana now, that's still a huge upgrade. I'm trying not to let my my rose-colored glasses of nostalgia persuade me too much in my evaluation of Thraxamundar, but let's be real, he's pretty dang cool, and the power is there. It's just, I don't think it's very resilient. So I think if we're being honest, I have to put him in the top of C. The ceiling of his power is there, but he's really easy to answer, really easy to deal with. All right, we have 2 more left. This is Toski, Bearer of Secrets. So this is for 3 and a green. It's a 1/1 squirrel that can't be countered. It's indestructible, attacks each combat if able, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. I've never seen this as a Voltron build. I have seen it in the 99 of just green decks in general, just because it's going to draw you a lot of cards, and it's going to get to stick around pretty easy because it can't be countered and it's indestructible. It's just really hard to get rid of this stupid little squirrel. However, I could see if you are doing Voltron, it is in green, so you have access to cards like Rancor and stuff to give it trample, which is going to help it get in there easier. And green also is good at, like, it has a handful of Anthem effects. It has 1/1 counters. I don't think it's going to really be that hard to make Toski a good Voltron commander. So power is there. And also just being able to draw cards on your commander, pretty good. But let's be real, I kind of think Toski was a mistake of a card. I kind of hate this card from a design perspective, and I think with that, I have to put it in the top of D. I'll admit that it's powerful, and that if you went the Voltron way with it, it is really strong, but I hate the design of the card. I think it was a mistake. Last card we're going to talk about today. This is actually, I don't remember where this was on the list, but this is relatively high up on the Voltron theme list on EDH Rec. This is Yargle Glutton of Urborg for 5 and a black. It's a 9/3 Frog Spirit. That's it. It doesn't have any other effect. So this is, I remember pulling this in a pack when I was drafting Dominaria, and I was like, I don't understand what's legendary about this thing other than that's funny. I mean, if you look at the cards that you're playing in this deck, I mean, it's like, yeah, okay, that's cool, but like, couldn't you play this in any black Voltron deck? Why would you want to play this 5-mana 9/3 that has no other upside? But I think that's the answer. I think you do it because it's funny. I think you do it because it's creative and it's unique, and it's honestly probably a pretty decent budget option because, I mean, a lot of these cards that are listed here are pretty dang cheap. So I think if you're going to go the mono black route, if you're going to go a budget route, this actually probably is a decent option for you. Plus, it's gonna be a conversation starter. It's going to be pretty fun. But again, I don't know where it would fall in the power category. So as far as it being funny, though, it's up there. We're going to put it like here in the middle of C. It's funny. I could see the perks of it, but I mean, I just can't see the raw power of a 9/3 for 5 mana that has no other upside. I don't see that working out all that good, but a good conversation starter, and definitely would get some laughs and be a good time. All right, so we're at the end of the list. I did not end up with a solid S or a solid F right out of the pack, so let's go ahead and do that real quick before we call this video good. So I think the F is pretty easy for me. I'm going to go ahead and put Karn down here. I just don't think it's that interesting of a design. It's kind of confusing. It plays weird. There's 2 other cards on this list that do a similar thing, and I just don't think it does it as well. So for me, Karn is going to be the F. For the S tier, I'm not sure what to put up there. I mean, honestly, all of these up here in the A category are pretty dang cool. But if we're just going to have to put one up in the S as one of those is my favorite, I'm actually going to go ahead and do a Layla. Like I said, it's cool that it has flexibility and there's multiple ways that you can build the deck. But if we're even just talking Voltron, I think that the power is there because it's going to be able to build itself up pretty easy. It has decent evasion. It's going to keep you alive longer because of the lifelink, and it's going to give you blockers to help you stay alive longer. So I think it as a card design is really cool, and the fact that there's multiple ways to build it. But if we're strictly talking about Voltron game design, this is also a good option just because it helps you keeps you alive. So that is going to do it for this tier list. I hope you guys liked it. I enjoyed getting to research some of this because some of this was stuff that I hadn't even actually ever heard of. A couple of these cards I wasn't very familiar with or wasn't familiar that there were Voltron builds of them. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Would you build any of these as commander decks specifically for Voltron? Do you have any other Voltron decks of a commander that's not listed here? That would be interesting to know as well. And then also let me know if there's any other tier lists you would like me to do in the future. I have one other that I'm for sure going to do in a couple weeks, but we will wait until then for you to see it. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and I will see you later.